for the topic. Now let's come towards the next topic, which is law of exercise. Law of exercise was given in the year 1930, and this is a very, you can say, a widely accepted principle. We know about practice makes a man perfect. We have been hearing it since our childhood that practice, practice and work, and this will make you more perfect, this will improve you. And therefore, this law of exercise is relates to practice and more frequent connection between stimulus and response. So Thorndike uh, sees that behavior is more strongly established through frequent connection of stimulus and response, which means that the more you are giving the stimulus, the frequent connection between stimulus and response, the more stronger the behavior would be. So if you want a particular learning from the student, so give them more frequent stimulus. A particular stimulus should be repeated again and again, and therefore that particular stimulus, because it's linked with a particular response, would also be happening again and again, and therefore that connection would be very strong and learning would be more effective. And therefore it's called law of exercise. The more you exercise, the more you learn. And for exercise, there should be stimulus and response association, because that's connectionism. So learning becomes efficient through practice. Strength is related to number of times the response has occurred. So the more the response is occurring, this means the more strong the learning would be. Now there are again two types of law of exercise. One is called the law of use, and if we have the law of use, so the opposite of this would be the law of disuse. And both the laws are anti of each other, they are opposite of each other. So again, it's very easy to recall them, because one of them is the anti of the other. So law of use says that the more frequent stimulus is being made, which is linked with a particular response, the stronger the learning, as we have already done this, which is linked with practice. The more you practice, the more you learn, the more stronger or the more effective the learning would be. So the law of use means that the more you use a particular stimulus and linked with a particular response, so the more frequent it is, the more use you are doing with that particular stimulus, the stronger the learning. And in comparison, the law of disuse is that if there is less connection between stimulus and response, then the learning would be weaker. If you, if the teacher uh, teaches a particular topic to a class and then forget about the topic, and that topic is not repeated again or is not studied in the class again, so this means that that particular topic is less frequently discussed. It is disuse, you are not using it again and again, and therefore that part would be weaker by the student. So if we do the example of law of use, so the opposite would also apply to the law of disuse. So remember, all the games are being using the same principle. The more you practice a particular game, the more better would be you in that particular game. The the more you practice a particular game, sometime there are also some researches that if you spend 10,000 hours in any of the activity, so you will acquire that particular activity on the expert level, on the advanced level, which is related to the law of use. Similarly, the more you write, the more better you are in writing. Similarly, practice with other languages. The more you're using that particular language, you're reading the books and making it practice again and again, the stronger the language would be. and also applies to typewriting, which means the writing speed with which one type on the keyboard on the computer. So the more they practice with the writing, the more stronger they would be. And similarly, we can apply them in the law of disuse as well. The less you practice the game, the weaker that game would be. And similarly, other practice in other writing, language, and other activities would also make it weaker if they are not practiced. What are the educational implications of law of exercise? So we can see that the complex tasks or the difficult tasks should be repeated again and again. The student should be provided with more practice. So if the topic is difficult, the teacher should provide more practice in that particular topic. So we can give the example of mathematics here. And similarly, students, you can give and you can think of so many examples yourself in the topics which are covered, which are difficult. So we see that mathematics sometime, is a hard nut to crack, is a difficult subject for most of the students, and therefore the teacher would always ask them to practice on rough paper, practice at home, and this will make them better in mathematics. So this relates to law of exercise. Similarly, it is also helped in different kind of other education activities. For example, handwriting. And I remember that, whenever I would go to my kids' school, so because my kids write horribly, so always the teacher would ask me to give the students, to give my kids a different kind of practice books to improve their handwriting. Similarly, drawing can also be improved with practice. And as we are learning math tables, so this is again relates to law of exercise. We are repeating them again and again, memorizing them through practice, and finally we learn them. Sometimes we learn them throughout our life. So the constant practice should be there, and then we would be able to learn. We also see that while teaching the topic, so the instructor keeps on repeating different points or keeps on repeating the important points. And this is again law of exercise. The teacher repeats the different kind of words or the different kind of text or different kind of ideas so that the student can learn them well. So remember, this can also be applied with different levels and with different students. Similarly, the exam revision is also an example of law of exercise, and how we memorize different things, memorization of different kind of definitions, memorization of Holy Quran, our prayers, all these are relates to law of exercise. And other examples are also there, which is driving, typewriting, singing, playing, language. All these can be improved through law of exercise. Now there are some criticism on the law of exercise as well. There are some weakness in the law of exercise. For example, it is being objected by different psychologists that practice alone is not sufficient for improvement. It is not um, it is not necessary that always the practice and practice more would aim at would result in improvement. There are other factors as well that affects the improvement, that affects a particular response which is linked with a particular stimulus. And some of them are mentioned here. For example, maturity of the muscles, maturity of a particular kind of a mental level which is required for a particular stimulus. If there is the mental maturity is not achieved, or the physical maturity is not achieved, the muscles maturity is not achieved, remember how much there is practice, how much you make the learner practice, they will not improve. This is same as just practicing with a baby to start jumping while the baby is not even able to sit, would not be effective because the required maturity level is lacking in that particular case. Similarly, if we allow the if we start teaching algebra to students of elementary class, so they will not do good. More, however they practice, they will not be able to improve it unless that particular mental maturity for that particular topic is achieved. Similarly, practice the improvement as most of in our activities, improvement is also linked with particular kind of tools or devices that we use, and without that particular devices we cannot achieve that particular result. For example, doing different kind of experiments, and for the experiment you require the tools and devices. So if the devices are not there, that particular practice with the devices which are not applicable there would not result in improvement. And similarly, the IQ level is also there. Some people would learn very quickly, so they would practice less and they would improve more. And in comparison, there would be students who would be practicing more and more, but because of low IQ, they will not be improving. So this means that this practice is again this improvement is again linked with the IQ level. Then there is inborn talent as well. Some students have particular inborn ability to work or to achieve a particular kind of behavior or a particular kind of achievement. And for other students it would be difficult because that student has inborn aptitude or attitude or some kind of abilities, innate abilities, and therefore they can just with a few practices they would be improving too much, and their growth rate is very high. Other factors which can also affect is intrinsic motivation. If the student is not intrinsically motivated, so again the practice alone is not sufficient for improvement, but with this intrinsic motivation combined, there would be drastic improvement. Similarly, the feedback is also important. Sometimes when the feedback is not given, there is this lack of interest by the students, and therefore that practice again and would not improve that particular activity. Another criticism is that when the learner is practicing, so if during the practice there are some errors that creep in, that are being added in the practice, then that practice is harmful. This will not result in improvement, rather it will result in undesired learning, which is not needed. For example, if a student is doing math and every time he's doing the math and he does not know the subtraction rules, and therefore he keeps on doing the mistakes, so however he practice, he would keep on doing the same mistake throughout mathematics unless provided the given feedback. And similarly in other activities as well, for example in typewriting or in music or in cycling, if the learner is again keep on repeating mistakes, then that practice would be harmful. If the mistake is somehow added with the particular activity and the learner is not noticing the error, also the improvement stops after a particular time. Remember, there is a maximum level of improvement, and people cannot improve beyond a particular level. There is always a particular maximum potential, the maximum peak point beyond which the learner cannot go. So the more they practice, the more they improve. But then there comes a point on which the law of exercise would not apply. The more they practice, would not result in improvement after some time, and either the graph would be steady, a straight line, or it may also go towards a decline. So this was a few criticism on or a weakness in connectionism in law of exercise. Our next topic is learning curves. Now what is learning curves? Learning curves is a curve that represents learning, that gives us information about learning. So it is used by psychologists and by educationists, by instructors, by employers to plot progress of the employee, or progress of the learners, progress of the students, and to see how difficult was that particular task or activity was. So the learning curve is linked or is traced for a particular topic or for a particular activity. Some topics or some activities are easy, and therefore their curves would be different, and some activities would be difficult, and therefore the shape of that learning curves would be different from the other one. So this set expectations, this gives us information about the time, the training, and the study might that is required to achieve the competency, or to achieve the expert level of a particular activity or particular topic or subject. So the learning curves gives us information about the time, duration, the training, and the difficult level of that particular learning that we try to research upon. Learning curve is good for it's useful for us in selecting course content. By learning curves, we would be able to identify the difficulty level of the particular content, or the difficulty level of the textbook, and therefore this helps us in rightly choosing the content for a particular curriculum. Let us see some of the learning curves in the next slide. So we have three learning curves in this slide. The x-axis represents the time spent on the activity, or the number of trials, or the number of occurrence, or how much the the activity is repeated. So this x-axis represents that particular time or particular level of knowledge, or particular um, trials, number of trials, and the y-axis represents for proficiency. It represents accuracy, the performance level, the improvement level. So if I look at this graph, this curve, so we can see that as the activity started, as the particular kind of project started, so the time was going towards the x-axis, but there is no improvement in the learning, which means that initially it was difficult to learn the concept, to gain mastery of the concept. So after spending some time on that particular activity, then we see that there is a sharp increase in the learning. So now with less time on the x-axis, the learnings are improving more because the graph is going up towards y-axis. So the learning started at a faster rate. But after some time, we see that the learning start not increasing at the same rate. So the learning was then less and less with the time, and finally we have a straight line, which means that the learning has reached to the maximum level. So now how much time they spent on the particular activity or project, there would be no more improvement in the activity. So this relates to a particular kind of learning. Most of our educational activities follow this principle. So we start with a particular learning. So initially the learning is not very fast, and after some time with the practice, so there is a sharp increase, and then there is a slower rate of learning, and then finally the learning achieve or reaches to the maximum level. In the next graph, we can see that as the activity was introduced, so there was a sharp increase in learning. So in less time, there is more the graph is going more higher, which means the learning or the proficiency or the accuracy or the performance level was increasing very fast. But again, then with time, we see that the rate of increase is now decreasing. the learner is not improving very quickly now, and finally again this graph is going towards a steady rate, which means that the learning has achieved to the maximum level. So if this graph is plotted for a particular kind of subject or a particular kind of activity, so we can assume that the activity was very easy because the learner starts with a very fast in performance, fast proficiency. So that type of content was very easy, and therefore there was a sharp increase. So such type of content can be made difficult because again the topic or the activity should also be challenging as well. So therefore then we switch towards the first kind of graph, which is more better as compared to the second graph. The third graph is not very much common, but again sometime we can also see this kind of graph in which uh, the with passage of time the learning is increasing at a steady rate, at a constant rate, and as the time is progressing, so the performance or the learning is also going at the same rate. So there is a more linear relation between learning and experience. So the learning curves uh, help us in understanding the difficulty level of a particular content and help us in choosing the right content for the right learners.